Welcome to Saturday of Holy Week. This is a week that we take to prepare ourselves for the miracle of Easter, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Yesterday we heard from Billy and celebrated the Lord's Supper together. And Billy asked you to read chapters 17, 18, and 19 of John's Gospel. This week, as we have been following the path that Jesus walked, the last week of his life, we have been using John's Gospel as our guide. As we walk this path with Jesus, today is Saturday, and Jesus is in the grave. John in the Gospel describes this burial this way. Now, there was a garden in the place where he was crucified, and in the garden there was a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. And so because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. Notice that last phrase. They laid Jesus there. In a tomb. They buried his body. That was Friday. Today is Saturday, and Jesus is still in the grave. Resurrection power has not yet been unleashed. Saturday, Holy Saturday, as some like to call it, is a hard day. There is only silence that stands between what was and what will be. So we wait and we wonder. This passage actually says nothing about Saturday. Chapter 19 ends with, they laid Jesus in a tomb. Chapter 20 begins with, early on the first day of the week. Friday is tragic. Sunday is joyous. But it is Saturday, and Jesus is still in the grave. But if you think nothing is happening, you're wrong. Something of profound importance is happening. Jesus' body is in the grave, but his spirit has descended into Hades, the place of the dead. See, when Jesus died, he experienced the same thing that everyone else experienced when they died. While the Bible does not describe Jesus' time in Hades, it does show us the results of it. Years later, near the end of John's life, he was shown a series of visions that we know as the Revelation, the Unveiling of Jesus Christ. In the first chapter, John described the moment in which he saw Jesus Christ in all of his second coming glory. John was so overwhelmed that he fell at Jesus' feet as though he were dead. Jesus reached down and touched John and said, "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last and the living one. I was dead, and see, I am alive forever and ever, and I have the keys of death and of Hades." When Jesus died, he descended into the place of the dead. But when he raised himself back to life again and left the place of the dead, they took with him the keys of death and of Hades. Who held those keys before Jesus took them? Answer: Satan did. Death was his domain. But now Jesus had invaded death, and he had taken possession of the keys of death and Hades. The Apostles' Creed summarizes the biblical message like this: suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. He descended into hell. The third day, he arose from the dead. When John says, they laid Jesus there, on one level, that's a literal historical fact. But on another level, it's really about you and me. See, the life of a true disciple of Jesus is a resurrected life. What happened to Jesus physically happens to us spiritually when we believe. For Jesus, His burial was both the final step in his humiliation and the first step in his exaltation. For the follower of Jesus, the very same thing is true. Burial is both the proof of death and the initiation of life. Such is the nature of resurrection. For there to be a resurrection, there must be a death. And burial is evidence of death. And when we come to faith in Christ, we die to sin and self. Then there is a resurrection. He raises us to a qualitatively new life. That's what baptism pictures. The waters of baptism are a picture of the grave. We die to self and sin, are buried, and are raised to walk in newness of life. And even as we live this resurrected life, there are still things in our lives that must die, namely self and sin. And when they do, we burst forth in newness of life every time. That's why Paul wrote in Galatians chapter 2, I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself up for me. It's Saturday, but take heart. Tomorrow is Sunday. Tonight I hope you will spend time reading chapter 20 of John's Gospel. Have a great evening, and we'll see you tomorrow morning.